Thanks, Kareem. And that was going to be my opening story, so about how Kareem and I met. But actually, before we get started, the other part of that I wanted to mention is that when we first started thinking about prizes at NASA, it had a lot to do with, I would say, tech watch. So we were actually interested in what's out there. You know, how do we open up our knowledge of the problem-solving space and not necessarily looking for specific solutions. So we were actually thinking more of the tech watch aspect. However, part of the serendipity of being able to go to a class while we're in the middle of thinking about this, we were also looking for a new air quality monitor at the time, which was a hard technology that we wanted to fly in the space station. And the reason this whole dialogue got going with Kareem was, my thought was, well, could we have found a novel air quality monitor on one of these platforms by throwing out a wide net and seeing what's out there and seeing what technologies exist. So we actually started down this path thinking about how to do a better job at TechWatch. So I'll tell you a little bit about just the history, see if this works, of how we got there. And I'll tell you a little bit more about strategy and business models perhaps than you want to hear, but we actually, that's how we went into it in terms of why we were using prizes. So I think it's an important takeaway point that we didn't just go run a prize because this was sort of a new thing. It was a new approach. We actually did it very deliberately and it went back to our strategic planning. So a little history. In 2005, we'd gone through a fairly significant R&D budget reduction, and we decided to have a visioning exercise, decide how should we work differently with people. And we then captured that in terms of a strategic plan. So one of my colleagues, Elizabeth's in the back, she can raise her hand, that helped put the strategic plan together, and also a benchmarking exercise, because we thought about the way we should work differently with people is in forms of alliances. We should partner with people around problems, around technologies, and we want to go talk to people who do alliances well. That was the benchmark that we went out and did with many other large organizations. And in doing that benchmark, we found that these large organizations associated their alliances and partnering 100% with innovation. So we were thinking about, okay, you know, creative ideas coming into the organization, and then in parallel, took the Harvard course. So even if you try to plan innovation, and there's still serendipity to it by taking the course and then discovering business cases on open innovation. And so we also folded that into our problem-solving kit. So we were, as you can tell from our strategic goals and the plan, we were about driving innovations, and to that meant getting our problems out there, being transparent, putting out the problems to the world that we can't solve or are stuck solving, and how can we find other problem solvers to work with us. So along those lines, so to just recap what I just said here, so we didn't just jump into prizes. We had about a 3 to 4 year run at this, again, with our visioning exercise, a strategic plan. The Harvard course came along right in the middle of that, and then we decided to run some open innovation pilots. So I'll say right from the get-go that we always envision prizes as another tool in the toolkit. I think you've heard that mentioned several times. So they're not the be-all and end-all solution set, but we thought they're an effective additional solution set to the typical mechanisms you might use, like small business proposals, grants and contracts, and things like that. And one of the reasons is you open up a very wide universe of potential solvers to come in, not perhaps the same people who apply to your grants, your contracts, or your small business proposals. So in contradistinction to the X Prize, NASA has experience with centennial prizes, sort of the large breakthrough community building prizes. We were focusing on, I would call, operational or tactical prizes. So these were aimed at a part of a problem, and I'll show you what that meant, and then I'm going to end with the Solar Flare Challenge. And Bruce Cragen, who's a Solar Flare Challenge winner, is here, so you'll hear from his perspective what it was like to work on that competition. I think it'd be a nice counterpart to what our administrative work was. Oops, wrong button was here. Okay, so a couple other things. Now, before we jumped into a prize, the idea was, what did we want to go out and do? I think that's important because I think you'll hear throughout the day, especially in the panels this afternoon, the point solution panel I have this afternoon, some of the key questions are, what did you get for the prize? You know, what was the overhead? What was the impact? And so we wanted to go out and do important challenges to us, important problems to solve. And I'll have to tell you, we actually went into the pilots not expecting any results necessarily. When we actually went out running tough technical challenges, but we did it against basically our portfolio of work. So I'll tell you how we define our portfolio, how we analyzed it, and then how we picked the problems to actually go outside with. So, okay, so real briefly, just to anchor you, what we do is take humans into space for long periods of time. That's what my group worries about from the human aspect, human health and performance, risk management. And there are about 65 human system risks for long duration spaceflight that we take care of across health, across environmental areas, human factors, things like that. For any one of those risks, we have a very deliberate process to try to mitigate that risk. And given incomplete resources, we have gaps. We have gaps in our knowledge, we might have gaps in our technologies, we may have gaps in the approach to a particular risk. So what we did was, at this time, we used an analytical method. We went through that risk portfolio. We picked 12 to 15 problems that we had where we had gaps, whether it was knowledge, technologies, whatever else. And again, right about the same time, we worked with one of Dr. Lacani's colleagues, Dr. Gary Pisano, who'd written a very short article in Harvard Business Review called "What Kind of Collaboration is Right for You?" And with some criteria, we mapped those problems to essentially a 2x2 square. This is right out of his article, so it's a little bit blurry. But the point is, using those criteria and looking at the problem set we had, the problems mapped to one of these 4 quadrants. Now, if you can see the elite circle down in the bottom left, that's you, that's your organization and your cadre of researchers and the people you work with closely all the time, and you make the determination that, hey, because of resources or the facilities we use or whatever else, the problem ought to stay there. However, if you took something, remember what I mentioned, the air quality monitor before, it nicely maps to the innovation mall, where you're just looking for a novel idea. You don't care who makes it, you're just interested in finding it and to see if it meets your criteria to bring in. So Kareem touched upon how if you're designing the problem, that your requirements for going out also become part of your evaluation set. That's exactly how we did it. So we did write requirements for a particular prize to go out, but they were high enough level to be at a functional level and not a very detailed level where you kind of close off that innovation space. And I'll tell you about a couple of interesting prizes we got back. So I think 90% of the speakers today have Joy's Law. So you've already heard this 5 times already today. But I think a question was raised earlier in the session about Joy's Law. And it's not so much that your organization doesn't have the smartest people. The way I portray this is it's a big world. And it just, to me, it means there are a lot of smart people out there, and that some of these platforms and prize mechanisms allow you to tap this large problem-solving space. And the other thing I liked, borrowed again from one of Kareem's slides earlier, is that knowledge is sticky and unevenly distributed. So even though we think we have the internet, people still work together on whiteboards and walking down the hall and writing on the whiteboard. They're not just posting solutions on the internet for you to find. And so these platforms, to me, give you this opportunity to find those whiteboards out there, to bring into that sort of collaborative space, if you will. So what did we do? I mentioned we got enough resources to do some pilot programs. And so we ran 4 sets of pilots. We ran on Innocentive. Kareem already talked about the size of the organizations that have solvers registered. These were more technology or point solution prizes. We ran them with yet2.com, which is a company that actually matches organizations to your organization to see if you can come up with a solution. It could be large, small organizations. We ran one with Topcoder. Mike Leiden's here with Topcoder. Mike, you want to raise your hand? And this was on developing a medical kit for a lunar mission to optimize a medical kit. And I could say out of that competition, which was fairly straightforward, it was a 10-day competition to come up with a software algorithm to optimize that kit, that growing and expanding that turned into NASA Tournament Lab that my colleague Jason Cruzan and Kareem work on now for a variety of different competitions. So that was a nice expansion of an early pilot program. And then NASA at Work is an internal set of challenges using the incentive platform, but running problems internally. So our sort of mental framework is you always do your analysis of your portfolio, you find where you have opportunities to engage a larger workforce. We run the challenges internally first to see if there are solutions across the NASA workforce. As you know, we're in 10 different centers, and then we could go externally through a variety of mechanisms. So what we're working on right now is a decision framework to say, when should you deploy tools at a particular period in time? And I'll give you a preview and a promotion for the point solution panel this afternoon. I got a chance to look at Dr. Alok Das's slides from the Air Force, and they've done very similar pilots to what we did, and they're looking at it a very similar way. What is an innovation or problem-solving toolkit? So you'll hear him describe that. And we're looking at it from the standpoint of a decision framework where how do these new tools and the more established tools like small business, grants, contracts, things like that play together. So if you're a project manager, we think they have a role to play throughout the lifetime of a project, not just at the very end where you might be stuck with a gap or a problem. So it's an interesting evolution to see how our organization, any organization, can start to solve problems differently. So just very quickly, because this will set up the Solar Flare Challenge that Bruce is going to talk about, we actually built a pavilion on Incentive. We wanted to draw people to the challenge platform. I noticed the Air Force did a similar thing, and you'll hear that from Dr. Das this afternoon. And we got a very brisk response. We had 2,900 solvers sign up from 80 countries around the world. So we got some very interesting ideas in, and I'll tell you about just a couple, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bruce to talk about the solar flare in general. And since I'm not a solar flare or radiation or any other kind of expert, since one's sitting right here, I'm not going to go into any details at all. I'll let him tell you about the challenge. This is a little bit busy slide, but we're working on metrics. Everyone's working on metrics. What I can tell you is that you look at the prize amount to the far right side, they range from a low of $7,500 in the bottom for a partial prize up to $30,000, which was a full award for the solar flare. So these were very operational, very tactical prizes. These are not the big tens of millions, $100 million prizes. We think right now fully loaded with time and effort, they're about 50K in that neighborhood, and so they're about half of a small phase one small business proposal, but we have to do all that homework as we repeat these to say, what's their cost effectiveness versus other mechanisms as we go along. And that's the reason for the decision framework. We want to pick the best tool for the right reason at the right time. And so ideation prizes, for instance, can be very low priced at $5,000 or so. And there's one of our partners in one of our centers that runs an ideation prize essentially before any new project. And their philosophy is we always don't know what we don't know. So we can't handle that kind of volume or load, so that's why the decision framework to try to deliberately deploy these tools.
Again, just in the slide, if you just notice the number of project rooms and submissions, that's the second to last, the last one, the two columns near the end. What it shows you is that you just have so many people looking at the problem. Right? The scale is overwhelming. Jeff could never replicate this within NASA. He couldn't get 174 people to look at that problem and think about it and have 22 people then submit a solution. It's just not possible. The economics aren't there to do this inside the organization.
So one other quick example before I just do the segue into Bruce. The improved barrier layers at the very top, this was a really interesting one. We were looking for food packaging technology for 5 years for perhaps a Mars mission. And the solver ended up being a Russian material scientist that found a flexible graphite material somewhere in Europe, I think Belgium. We actually met enough of our requirements. We actually procured the material and tested it. It turned out it was too friable to actually do packaging, but it advanced our knowledge way down the road. I mean, we would never have thought about flexible graphite material as a material for packing foods. That's a way of changing our culture and our thinking of who out there can solve your problems for you, and a lot of people can. Yeah, Keith.
You just give a perfect example, and you showed a map of people all over the world, the national Russian. Where does the ITAR boogeyman come into this? You may think, I'm not asking something that's ITAR sensitive, but you could get something back from somebody in Nairobi and think, oops, that's, I mean, where do you have people just being professionally paranoid about this, or do you wait to see if it happens and then work on it? Or?
In terms of like ITAR and things like that, this was a one-way valve, so these were ideas coming in, so we were only putting the problem out.
But what if the guy in Nairobi just figures something out and like...
Well, actually, we have a two-step process for looking at that. So first it gets screened by the company, in this case, Innocentive, and then we screen it after that. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Well, what if there's lots of smart people out there, what if somebody outside of the U.S. sphere is working on something that we say, oops, that's something we should be, or, it's ITAR sensitive here. How come he's working on it, or how did he figure it out?
It's good for you to know, right?
Yeah.
It's good for you to find out that there's something I already has an answer.
Well, exactly. That's sort of, you say, well, okay, well, guess what? Or does that feed back into the process, or is it just the typical ITAR paranoia that, oh no?
I guess it could. We haven't run into that. That's a good question. It could. I mean, but in this case, we were looking for things fairly straightforward in our world, like the food packaging and things like that. But it could, based on the nature of the problem you're in. So real quick, just to ask, just to set up the stage for Bruce, because I got the 5-minute warning back here. We put out a challenge, and I have to say, Bruce, this is one we didn't expect a result on at all. So we were looking, for us to predict a solar flare for 24 hours, kind of the holy grail of operations, because we have crew members who are out on the planetary surface, and we can do better operationally if they can get farther away from the habitat or protected space. And so we put this out with, again, our criteria were predicting ability from 4 to 24 hours at a 2 sigma confidence interval, and what we got back was much more than that at 8-hour prediction. And Bruce, I think you turned in 75%, and our folks ran the algorithms of actually 85% accurate out to 8 hours. Now, it's not our 24 hours yet, but it advanced the ball, and it's more predictive capability than we had. And so this was really quite a nifty challenge for us to get this result back from. And I think that's my last slide, and that's my introduction into Bruce Cragen, who was the winner.